I got the black yak with me. Donald Trump hit with 34 felony counts of falsifying business records, from an investigation into the hush money payment to porn star Stormy Daniels. Donald Trump pled not guilty. If convicted, he could face up to a 136-year maximum sentence. Falsifying business records is a misdemeanor in New York, but can be upgraded to a felony if the action is done to hide other crimes. Trump was not handcuffed, jailed, or subjected to a mugshot. Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg explains why Donald Trump is facing felony charges.
Felony to falsify business records with intent to defraud and an intent to conceal another crime. That is exactly what this case is about. 34 false statements made to cover up other crimes. These are felony crimes in New York State, no matter who you are. Donald Trump, executives at the publishing company American Media Incorporated, Mr. Cohen, and others agreed in 2015 to a catch and kill scheme. That is, a scheme to buy and suppress negative information to help Mr. Trump's chance of winning the election. As part of this scheme, Donald Trump and others made 3 payments to people who claimed to have negative information about Mr. Trump. To make these payments, they set up shell companies, and they made yet more false statements, including, for example, in AMI, American Media Incorporated's business records. One of the 3 people that they paid to keep quiet was a woman named Stormy Daniels. Less than 2 weeks before the presidential election, Michael Cohen wired $130,000 to Stormy Daniels' lawyer. That payment was to hide damaging information from the voting public. The participant scheme was illegal. The scheme violated New York election law, which makes it a crime to conspire to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. The $130,000 wire payment exceeded the federal campaign contribution cap, and the false statements in AMI's books violated New York law. That is why Mr. Trump made false statements.
Oh, Trump accused Bragg of using the case as a politically motivated witch hunt, recently lashing out at the DA and judge in his case. Trump's erratic behavior could prompt Judge Juan Merchant to issue a gag order to prevent him or his attorneys from speaking publicly about the case outside court filings and proceedings. Protesters and counter-protesters assembled outside the Manhattan Criminal Courthouse in New York today, including Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene and New York Representative George Santos. Let's break this whole thing down, folks, with what took place today. I've got Charles Butler, a member of the Project 21 National Advisory Committee out of Chicago, attorney Matt Manning. He is out of Texas. Mustafa Santiago Ali, former senior advisor for environmental justice at the EPA. Dr. Niambi Carter, associate professor, University of Maryland School of Public Policy. Dr. Jason Nichols, senior lecturer, African American Studies, University of Maryland at College Park. Glad to have all of you here. Matt, I want to start with you. You're the lawyer here. A lot of people were speculating before, oh, weak case, weak case. How do you assess these 34 counts?
So I think they brought this the right way, and the reason I think they brought it the right way is because they made the crime as narrow as possible. So the crime here is falsifying business documents, and what they're alleging, obviously, is that there were payments made to Mr. Cohen that alleged to be payments for his legal services that were not, in fact, for legal services. I think the case can be strong by virtue of how many counts they brought. 34 counts could mean that a jury could find one single count he was, in fact, guilty of, and that could be enough to not only convict him, but also potentially send him to prison. Where I think there will be difficulty is going to be jurisdictionally, how they prove where certain things occurred. And even though the indictment kind of hedges on that and says it may have occurred in New York County or elsewhere, they're ultimately going to have to prove to a jury that the finality of the crime, i.e. the actual entry of the false record, occurred in New York County, or at least has enough of a nexus to New York County for there not to be a reasonable doubt on that. Where I think there will be difficulty is going to be keeping clear to a jury exactly who made what payment when, how the money was transferred, because those things are easy to see on paper, but they're difficult when you're hearing it from a witness, right? When witnesses are testifying where they got money from, who they sent it to, and proving that to a jury. Because one of the problems that I think they'll have is that this Trump organization is enormous. It has a lot of moving parts and a lot of people that work for it. So it may be more difficult than people are able to recognize to prove that, in fact, Donald Trump is the one who falsified the records. However, there are apparently, based on the statement of facts, a number of pieces of evidence that they're able to directly tie to Mr. Trump as having made those payments on his own. And that's where I think the difficulty will be for his defense team, because no matter how much they try to create smoke and mirrors, if someone gets on the stand and says, he paid me, I met him, we talked about it, and he's the one who signed the check, and there's any extrinsic proof of that, I think they're going to have difficulty defending all 34 counts. And that's why I think they brought it in a smart way. I also think that the statement of facts is good because it trots out the entire context. And what people may not understand about this is when you prosecute a criminal case, depending on how the law works in that particular state, you're able to put forth a lot of contextual evidence. So what's important about that here is all of the stuff will come in, for the most part, depending on what the judge allows in, based on the conversations and rather the payments to Stormy Daniels and to the other woman that are alleged in the statement of facts. That's important because a jury will be able to see the full context of not only what payments were made, but why those payments were made, which would lend credence to the idea that Mr. Trump, in fact, wanted those payments to be made and may have facilitated some of them. So I think it's a strong case in terms of how it's brought. I think the difficulty will be in the presentation and keeping clear to 12 people exactly what he's alleged to have done, when he's alleged to have done it, and having proof thereof.
A lot of people talk about, again, our system says equal justice under law, but the reality is he wasn't fingerprinted. There was no mugshot, wasn't handcuffed. Was that fair and just?
I don't think so. I mean, if that's what happens to every other defendant in New York criminal court, that's exactly what should have happened to Donald Trump. I do think that there will be some considerations that are going to be unique to him. I mean, being the former president, he's got Secret Service detail and presumably a very busy schedule. But I was thinking before I even got on the show tonight, in most of the cases that I have, one of the constant things that a defendant has to do is remain domiciled in that county, and they can't leave without permission. I don't know how his pretrial officer is going to enforce that happens, but here you just have a defendant who has a different life than most defendants. But that doesn't mean that what happens in the courtroom needed to be different. So he definitely should have been fingerprinted, and all of the other mechanisms that they use with any other defendant should have been exercised with him.
Well, in fact, when we think about when former Mayor Andrew Gillum, go to my iPad, when he appeared in court, you will see there it says Gillum walked into the courtroom wearing leg shackles and handcuffs with a chain around his waist. The same for Sharon Letman Hicks, who was also charged in the case as well. Charles Butler, you've been an ardent supporter of the president. Again, the DA has hit him with these 34 different charges. He's been blasting it, calling it a political witch hunt, but his own lawyer went to jail for the same issue.
Well, Roland, I want to congratulate you, first of all, on your great show. I'm glad you're back on the air. You're kicking it, man. I love it. I love your show. I love your energy. And I love what you do.
Appreciate
so I want to
it.
get that out of the way. Roland, you and I have been around this game a long time. And when Cyrus Vance Jr. didn't take up going after Donald Trump, there's something there. Cyrus Vance Jr., as you well know, is old school, old boy, connected white boy. Powerful. I think Mr. Bragg went out on a limb. I think he's going to get burned. I think Fannie Willis down in Atlanta, I think she's going to get burned. I think when you look at the statute of limitations, I mean, where do you stop? If statute of limitations on a misdemeanor is 2 years, and you go back and say, well, I'm going to stretch it to 3. I want to make it a felony so I get 5. I had the same thing happen to me in Chicago with some Chicago cops who tried to take a misdemeanor and make it a felony. And the state wouldn't do it because it was so ridiculous, because the incident never happened in the first place, where I was supposed to whooped this white boy and took his cane and all this other stuff. But the incident never happened. But that's how the cops wrote it up. But it was dismissed and all that good stuff. Anyway, I think that Bragg made a mistake. I'm sorry that he's out there on that limb by himself, because there's some very powerful people out there who are not supporting him and not supporting what he did, and they're on his side of the aisle.
Well, the thing that I find to be interesting here, Niambi, is that if we're talking about an equal justice system, Donald Trump is getting the benefit of the doubt that other folks have not gotten. And the reality is this here. Republicans typically are super law and order, very much about pro-prosecution, pro-DA, pro-law enforcement. In this case, they're anti-law enforcement.
They were also anti-law enforcement on January 6th. They were anti-law enforcement this entire time. I mean, look, Donald Trump is going to say what he always says, that this is part of some deep state conspiracy to come after him, and never address the real substance of the matter. So while people want to say this is small potatoes, these were misdemeanors, when you're trying to cover up another crime, that can make it a felony. And the fact of the matter is they're relying on campaign documents, these supposed payments to Michael Cohen, which were supposed to be for legal services, were just reimbursement so he could funnel this hush money to not just Stormy Daniels, but another woman and allegedly also a doorman. So there's a lot of moving parts here. And I think your previous guests were right that trying to get a jury to understand this is going to probably be the harder part. But we have to remember, they've been talking to this grand jury since January, and they got that grand jury to at least agree to indict. And while an indictment is not a conviction, I do think getting this far is at least a suggestion that Donald Trump is not invulnerable, right? I mean, and I think this is an important moment to reinforce that for everyone. No one is above the law, even former presidents. And I think Republicans are kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth when they talk about this law and order thing. They want us to wait and see and let all the facts come out. But when the facts come out on their kind of people, they don't want to accept them for what they are.
Mustafa. You're unmuted. You're on mute. You're on mute.
I'm old enough to remember, if you can hear me.
Yep, we got you. We got you.
When Donald Trump created a witch hunt against the Central Park Five and did everything that he could to make sure that the legal system utilized its full ability to prosecute those innocent brothers. So now that the chickens have come home to roost, he now gets the opportunity to feel the same spotlight of when, someone is going through this type of situation. And for those who say that he's being treated unfairly, I would remind them about People versus the New York versus James Garner, or versus Josue Aguila Dubon, or Jose Palmer, or Juan Foley. All of these folks were actually convicted on the falsification of business records. So now, we have to make sure that justice is equal, and that means that he has to face the same jury trial that all these other folks had to go through.
Jason, I think about a young black man who spent a long time in Rikers, allegedly for stealing a backpack. Mm-hmm. A backpack. Mm-hmm. So people talk about Donald Trump being treated unfairly. Right.
Yeah. No, I mean, rest in peace to Khalif Browder. Yeah, I mean, first of all, if we look at it, John Edwards has a mugshot. We saw John Edwards' mugshot. We've seen Tom DeLay's mugshot. John Edwards was a former presidential candidate and a former vice presidential nominee. He still got a mugshot. For some reason, we didn't do that with Donald Trump. The other thing, to the point about Cy Vance that one of your guests made, Cy Vance was told to stand down by the SDNY, who, of course, were directed by Bill Barr, who was the head of the DOJ at the time. At the same time, at that point in time, you cannot indict a sitting president. So all of that, that argument, I think, is not a strong one. The other thing is, I think Donald Trump is in trouble right now because of, as you stated earlier, the head of AMI, David Pecker. So it's one thing you can easily impeach the credibility of someone like Michael Cohen. You can say he's a convicted liar. You can say all of those things. You can say he had an axe to grind. You can say he's out doing media. He wants his podcast to blow up. You can say all of that. But then you bring in David Pecker, and there's somebody backing up the story. Now, mind you, there's also video of Rudy Giuliani admitting that he looked at the records and saw that he had paid Michael Cohen for services that were never rendered. Now, again, one of the things that we know is that hush money payments in and of themselves are not a crime. That's not a crime. But when you're doing it in the way that Donald Trump did it, it can be elevated to a misdemeanor when you're falsifying records, if you're falsifying it for the purposes of taxes, whatever it is, that becomes a misdemeanor. And of course, if you're doing it in furtherance of another crime, then it becomes a low-level felony. I don't believe we're ever going to see Donald Trump in jail because of who he is, because if you can shoplift somewhere in Harlem, and I guarantee you'll see the inside of a jail cell, but you won't see it if you're a powerful billionaire flying in on private jets. And it really upsets me that there are so many people out there. He's raised $10 million off of this. There are people out there who complained about inflation, complained about gas prices, but they have money to subsidize a billionaire's legal bills. And I don't fully understand that. They also screamed, lock her up. All that time, they went around and said, it doesn't matter. Donald Trump himself said she may be indicted, so she is disqualified from running. But yet, all of a sudden, the tune has changed. And one last thing, when the gentleman said something about Cy Vance's side of the aisle, I think Alvin Bragg's side of the aisle, I think Alvin Bragg's side of the aisle is the law. That's what Alvin Bragg's side of the aisle is. No, he's not coming and prosecuting this as a Democrat or a Republican.
He certainly is.
Go ahead, Charles.
He certainly is, Roland. This has been political from the get-go. He ran on the fact that he was going to prosecute Donald Trump. So for you to sit there and say it's not political, the guy used it in his campaign.
So help me out here. Let me just be perfectly clear. Donald Trump said things that he was going to do. It's a political office. And the reality is, you also take a look at it. You had an attorney general when Trump was president who tried to roll back the consent decree in Baltimore, and the federal judge said absolutely not, we're moving forward with it. So when you talk about what Cy Vance didn't do, the reality is when you have a new person in, things change. Look, you had a DA in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, that prosecuted Bill Cosby when the previous DA chose not to prosecute Bill Cosby. There are other examples where a new DA comes in and says, these now are the policies of our department, which is different from the previous one. You had the DA in San Francisco who was recalled, and the new DA comes in and reverses many of the things that he did. That's what happens when someone new comes in. We're back talking about what took place in New York City today, Donald Trump being arraigned. My guests, we have Charles Butler, Matt Manning, Dr. Naim B. Carter. We, of course, have Mustafa, my alpha brother, and, of course, well, Charles is alpha, too, so I won't leave you out, Charles. And then we got Jason as well. The thing here, Charles, Trump has been attacking the judge. I wouldn't really advise that. I know he loves to attack everybody, but if there's one person you probably don't want to be running your mouth about, it's the judge.
Well, his mouth lost in the election, Roland. So, I mean, the guy is a New Yorker. You know, he talks, he says the wrong things, he focuses on the wrong issues. This is not a reality show. You know, he's running for president of the United States, and he needs to get serious about what's going on here. And this thing with Stormy Daniels is going to blow over. You know, I mean, that's what these people do. You and I, we going to go to jail. You know, we gotta come out of pocket and spend lawyer and attorney fees. The system's broken. We as black men, we know there are 2 or 3 systems of justice. So, you know, you look at a guy like OJ. If OJ didn't have the money he had, he'd still be serving time. And by the way, you mentioned Bill Cosby. That was totally wrong going after Cosby. Totally. And I'm glad the man is out.
But the thing here, Matt, is interesting because I hear what Charles is saying, but here's the deal. Donald Trump has gotten preferential treatment because of who he is, because of his money. Folks have been scared to hold him accountable. And so for the people who are now mad because he got indicted, well, hell, right. Wesley Snipes went to prison. Ron Isley went to prison not paying their taxes. Look, Dan Morales was a former Texas Attorney General who went to prison for falsifying loan documents, overstating income. Hello? Donald Trump we know what the hell he's done. He has gotten away with things because of who he is. To me, this is the system saying, yeah, you're not above the law, dude.
Yeah, and two things can be true at the same time. If you notice, Charles jumped straight to the straw man you always hear, which is an indictment of the whole system. And there's no question. The system is itself flawed. It is not applied evenly. Those things are true. However, it is also true that in this case, Donald Trump made payments to conceal a crime, and he did it in the dumbest way possible, which makes no sense to me considering the infrastructure that you have. Why would you falsify the documents rather than just get money from your own bank account and pay it to him cash? I mean, not that I'm in any way encouraging criminal activity, but it doesn't make any sense to me that this is the route that they went. And it could be part and parcel with the idea that he thinks he's Teflon Don. No matter what happens, I'm going to beat it every time. You're a billionaire. The reality is you move through the space differently. The problem I think they have in this case is 34 counts is a lot of counts. So he could be cooked on 1, 5, 10, 15. They could find him not guilty on the other 19, and it's immaterial because he's guilty on whatever number that they find. And the thing about this case that I think will be difficult for his defense team is if they're able to really kind of obfuscate, how the money moved and who got money and all of that, they'll probably confuse a number of the jurors. But if the prosecution does a good job of keeping it very simple with basic evidence on this day, Donald Trump in this place made this payment to Michael Cohen or to this other person, then they're going to have a lot of trouble because if the jury finds beyond a reasonable doubt that he in fact made those payments, then he's cooked. It's pretty simple. And that's why I think this indictment is put forward in a smart way. Now, do I think there's a political element? Of course, everything has political overtones these days. But if we're going to have a system, it has to work, in a certain way. And that correct way is when somebody is indicted, they're arraigned, and they have to deal with the charges. I think what makes this case particularly hard and that's actually out of Trump's control is just the reality that he's the former president. And I don't know how you supervise a former president on bond conditions. I don't know how you enforce those bond conditions. I don't know how you interact with the Secret Service. I mean, there are parts of this case that are just going to be different. And frankly, I think parts of this case that will really kind of push things in the public zeitgeist is, does Donald Trump get a fair trial? I have no question that there's probably going to be very compelling evidence there, but the whole world knew about the nature of these charges before he ever went to trial. So I do think it implicates some constitutional questions and questions about venue and all those kinds of things. But, if they get people in the box referring to the veneer people and they say I can be fair and impartial and I don't know enough about this situation to have my mind made up now, that theoretically he could get a fair trial wherein they might, in fact, convict him of at least a number of these counts.
I'm cracking up laughing at a lot of these people who are like, oh, this absolutely helps Donald Trump politically. I don't necessarily think so.
Well, that remains to be seen. We know for his diehard supporters, there's not a lot that anybody can say or do that's going to dissuade them. Now, what we do know is that scandals typically don't work well for candidates, but the way that looks is probably going to be different because you have a lot of members of his own party who've decided to either say nothing or say they support him, even if it's the most tepid support. They're going to say that outwardly because right now they want to kind of close ranks around him. I think what's probably more likely to happen is those Republican leaners who sat out in 2020 because they didn't like Donald Trump, those people who are Republicans and vote Republican most of the time, but this was not the guy that they could stand or stomach anymore, particularly after January 6th and all the other things. I think was probably more likely than not to happen is those people will stay home. The problem is we have a primary cycle, and that's when the most motivated people show up. So if you have a bunch of Trump supporters showing up for the primary, he could still walk away with the nomination because primary voters aren't like general election voters. For some of the reasons that you pointed out, Roland, people get fatigued, people get tired, and at least for now, he is still standing above his challengers, Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley, for this Republican nomination. So, I mean, he could eke something out if he can make it through a primary, and that's kind of all he needs to do right now. He could still show up in the general election.
But Jason, one of the reasons that why he lost, people were sick of the crazy. And the reality is he brings the crazy back, and you can't try to make an argument, hey, well, let's move America forward when we're dealing with the crazies.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with Nyambi. I think his whole political brand is victimization and grievance. That's his political brand. And so I think in a Republican primary, he brings out the crazies, but the crazies have the loudest voices. And sometimes that will help him because these people like to feel like they're being aggrieved and they're being victimized. So I think he's actually going to run away. If I were to predict, I don't think it's going to be close. I think he's going to run away with it. We also know that Ron DeSantis just doesn't have it. Like he's just not the guy. He comes across as smug and just not personable. And I think Donald Trump is a performer. And now he's going to put on the performance of I'm being wronged. They really want to come after you. I'm just standing in their way. He's going to do all of that. And I think that it will work with the primary. But I also agree with Nyambi that when it comes to the general election, this is not going to help him. Those people, those kind of Mitt Romney, Susan Collins, John Kasich kind of Republicans, they probably split in 2020. And they're going to completely go and vote third party or not vote at all come 2024 if Donald Trump is the candidate. They realize that he is a political liability. We've seen him lose or at least really hurt Republicans in 3 straight elections right now from 18, 20, and 22. So I think they can't dump Trump because the loud voices are with him. The crazies are with him. He has such an aggressive base that everybody is afraid of, and that's why they're coalescing around him instead of attacking him right now. But I think it's going to hurt him in a general election, and Joe Biden will run away with it. And I don't think Joe Biden is a particularly popular president right now, but he'll run away with this thing. The one thing that I'll disagree with, I agree with everything Matt said except for one thing, and that is earlier he talked about the Trump organization kind of being a big company. And I think one of the things that Alvin Bragg, I think, is going to try and get across is that, like Barbara Rez says, who actually worked with Trump for many, many years, is that the Trump organization is not General Motors. It's not a big company, and that Donald Trump has knowledge of every single thing that happens and goes on. So he doesn't have plausible deniability in saying, oh, I didn't know where the money went. I didn't direct this. This was some assistant or some, junior vice president. He knew everything that went on in that company. He had his hands in every single element. Him and Alan Weisselberg made all the decisions together. So I think it's more about showing that this is not General Motors. This is not the company that you thought you knew from watching The Apprentice. It is a small company that just, dealt with big money.
Mustafa, look, here's the deal. We can talk about who gets impacted, who doesn't. Here's the reality. He is going to have to be dealing with a criminal proceeding. He's running for president. And here's what it's also going to do. It's going to expose all of these Republicans. It's going to expose them and also the white evangelicals, because ain't nothing like, hey, please defend payments to a porn star. please defend paying off a doorman who said you had a child out of wedlock?
Yeah, it's interesting. Donald Trump has never cared about the rule of law. He's never cared about people in this country. Before he became president in 2016, 30 years before that, he had over 3,500 cases where he had been sued. So you bring that forward, that you have individuals who are still willing to stand behind him, to support him, as was said, both financially and with people's time. But, like I said before, the chickens have now come home to roost. He's going to find out that the rule of law exists in our country and that he can no longer bully folks. He can no longer escape the law, and that he will be held accountable.
All right, well, we'll see what the hell happens. Here's what's not gonna happen. Ain't no way in hell I'm dedicating every damn show to this bullshit dealing with Donald Trump. There's a lot of stuff we gotta focus on in Black America. And if y'all wanna see that kind of crap, y'all can go to CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and the rest of them. That ain't what I'm doing. That's why he didn't lead my show today. The murder of my Alfred brother, Dr. King, remembering that's what led this show. That's why we do what we do. All right, folks, back to our Roland Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment. When you talk about blackness and what happens in black culture, we're about covering these things that matter to us, speaking to our issues and concerns.
This is a genuine people-powered movement.
There's a lot of stuff that we're not getting. You get it, and you spread the word.
We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. We cannot tell our own story if we can't pay for it. This is about covering us. Invest in Black-owned media. Your dollars matter. We don't have to keep asking them to cover our stuff. So please support us in what we do, folks. We want to hit 2,000 people, $50 this month, raise $100,000. We're behind 100,000, so we want to hit that. Y'all money makes this possible. Check some money orders. Go to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C. 20037-0196. The Cash App is $RM Unfiltered. PayPal is R Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered. Zelle is Roland at RolandSMartin.com.